Now, in recent days, there have been questions raised about why building developers do not use professional architects and engineers in the construction industry. Recent accidents that have claimed a loss of life have raised queries as to how these issues will be handled when more upcountry developers start to deploy high-rise structures in their urban areas. We did speak to Dr Isaac Mutenyo, who is the Chairperson of the Engineers Registration Board, and Miriam, Lawino, who is the Vice Chairperson of the Architects Registration Board, about these problems and more in this news story.
We expect that infrastructure will be built at a very high rate. I mean, if you look at what's going on now in the cities, apart from Kampala, we have now 10 cities. And there's a massive flow of resources to these cities to make sure that they develop. And we're doing, in the Westmead project, for instance, we're doing so many roads. And once the public infrastructure improves, the private developers also think of, benefiting from that. And that is what is happening, okay? So because of that, the rate at which the infrastructure is growing is very high. Now we need to build up the speed of the regulation and the enforcement to make sure that the people who are doing the enforcement, the people who are doing the engineering, the contractors also match up that speed. I think that is lacking now. And I think one of the most important things to be done, one is to strengthen the enforcement. And enforcement, I'm talking about who are the people who are supervising, who are the people who are making sure that the developments conform to the planning, physical planning, and so on and so forth. That's one. Two, the developers also have to understand that there are some standards. Even when you are doing something at a very high speed, there are some standards which must be conformed to.
All the buildings that have collapsed, all of them are not approved by the local authorities. The second thing, all of them, when you investigate, they don't have architects, professionals. There are no engineers on the sites, there are no architects, and in so doing, even the quality of the materials that are being used are wrong. For any building, most of these buildings that have collapsed, you realize that when you look at the reinforcement of the collapsed building, it's like this reinforcement is being got from the store. There is no cement on the reinforcement. There is no concrete. You cannot see it embedded onto the reinforcement, and that tells you that there was no bonding at all. So that means the materials that are being used, either they are not using the right concrete, they're not using the right cement, they're not using the right specifications. Because when you're building, especially for those concrete storage structures, we usually have, we do concrete tests and do cubes and study mixtures, because the structural engineer should have specified that mixture, and that mixture has to be adhered to.
Somebody, because he was on a building and he saw that they are mixing sand and cement and some steel bars, he goes on the site and is the one in charge. And that is very catastrophic. So we want to register those as well, that when you go on a site, you should be able to see those fellows licensed. And licensing not only makes them have the competence, but also makes it easy for us to trace them, that you are able to know that construction site that is moving at that rate, who is the engineer, who is the technician, and so on and so forth. Now, we would like there to be a very, very strong linkage between the person who is designing, okay, first of all, the architect, the one who imagines it, the brain behind this structure, the one who is designing, and the one who is actually doing the construction. In fact, the best thing would be the one who designs, supervises the contractor. Right now, it's not a requirement, but it would be good that you have the designer making sure that the thing that he designed is the right thing that is put on the ground. We have seen cases where somebody designs a 4-story building. That design is taken to the authority. It is approved. It's passed on to a contractor, and the developer together with the contractor, you find them building a 7-story structure. That's completely unacceptable. It happens. Now, if we create that link between the designer and the contractor, the designer would never allow that. Because if you want a 7-story building instead of 4, if your idea has changed, you need to have the designer to look at it again and probably change the foundation. And then once that change is made, take it back to the authority to approve.
We are under the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development. So that means that under that ministry, all local authorities have been given instructions that no plan can be approved without an architect having designed it. And architects have that green stamp. They call it the green stamp. So when you go to the local authority, they will say that your plan does not have a green stamp. And that means that it does not have the blessing of an architect or someone has designed it. And that is for a single storied structure. The moment it goes into the double storied or so, then it also has to have structural drawings, engineering drawings, structural engineering drawings.
The developers also have to understand that there are some standards. Even when you are doing something at a very high speed, there are some standards which must be conformed to. For instance, if you are building these massive structures, storage buildings, there's a minimum time at which you must allow, some stability. Like concrete, you have to allow concrete for 7 days once you cast it untouched. And then beyond the 7 days, you also have to allow it for 28 days before you load it to the maximum. Now, that means that even as you are moving very fast in your development, you have to conform to those standards. I think for construction and development of this kind, there are too many acts. There could be others, of course, there are others, but the two main ones. I think the first one is the Engineers Registration Act. And that one, the most important thing is that it allows only the engineers who have been certified by the Engineers Registration Board to practice. In other words, it should be only them in charge. Then there's the Building Control Act, which now sets forth the supervision, the procedures, and the standards. Those are the two main ones.
So every year, we register architects, and every year we publish the list of practicing architects. Every year, we publish the list of practicing architects in the newspapers and also on our website. Some people, after publishing those names, others will still go and register. But if you want reconfirmation whether those are registered, you can still call the Architects Registration Board. We have a registrar. I can drop an email to the registrar and ask confirmation, whether if you're in doubt.
Moving forward, we are planning to hold a meeting arising out of this, but even the other catastrophes. It will be a meeting of putting together our minds, the Engineers Registration Board and the Building Review Board, to sit together and agree. Okay? One of the things that I've seen when we investigate these collapses, the authorities, either they don't have capacity or they don't have the resources, to go and keep checking. Because the building is supposed to be monitored. You keep checking whether it's going on well. One of the things that we are thinking of is that that gap can be closed by some delegation. We have the Institution of Engineers, which has so many engineers. I told you we have about 1,400 on the register. But the Uganda Institution of Professional Engineers has so many. They even have branches. We want to explore ways in which we can use the authorities, cases A as an example, where they can delegate their monitoring or supervision role to those branches of the Uganda Institute of Professional Engineers. I can tell you that the engineers who live within Kampala here see all these lapses. They see them all the time. But it's not, they can tell us that we've seen a structure here which looks to be, a hazard, a catastrophe in the waiting, and they report, all you can do is inform KCCA, but if they are given the delegation, then they are able to go on the site and say, look, we are under delegation from KCCA, we would like to know who is in charge of this building.
So if the local authority decided to halt your work, they are correct to do so, and you'll not take them to court to do that. So I implore all local authorities to go on board, to begin approving these plans and enforcing and making sure that plans are designed by architects, plans are supervised. If individuals are walking by the roadside and they raise an alarm, I think they should be bringing this issue to the relevant authorities. They either bring it to the KCCA, or they take it to the Engineers Registration Board, or they take it to the Architects Registration Board. So that this issue, there is even now the National Building Review Board that has just come up, that is responsible for all structures and constructions that are going on. So when that issue is brought up with all those boards, I'm sure that structure will have to be stopped henceforth. For instance, if KCCA came and found a building and realized that that building shows deflection, because I can assure you a building will not collapse all of a sudden and collapse. It will first deflect. So you'll see the beams deflecting. Why wouldn't you tell a developer and even enforce as a local authority when you begin seeing warning signs until it has been averted? I implore all developers to hire professionals. And by professionals, I mean a registered architect with a practicing certificate for that year, a registered engineer with a practicing certificate for that year. Because if they don't have a practicing certificate for that year, they are not allowed to practice for that particular year. So that in the event that you have structures that are collapsing, you have an area. Because we have professional indemnity as architects. We have professional indemnity. We have insurance. So your insurance company can be able to compensate your client.